And with me is John Sutter, who designed and drove the initiative for the Beads of Courage project. So John, what is the Beads of Courage project all about?
The Beads of Courage project was founded in 2005, and it now is being used in over 260 children's hospitals throughout the world. And annually they're reaching 60,000 children. The purpose of the program is to comfort children and teens that are undergoing serious medical procedures. And they do this by giving them beads to symbolize their bravery and courage. The beautiful handcrafted boxes that we will be giving them provide them with a safe and meaningful place for them to keep their beads.
So John, how did the idea for this design come about? It's not your traditional turn wooden box that most of us make.
Right. Well, in an effort to come up with a design that is a little different than boxes I've been making over the years, I decided to try and combine a constructed box with turning. So that's how I got started. I've made them both in hexagonal and octagonal. One of the things that I really liked about this type of box is that when a flat side intersects with a conical top or bottom, you get this nice scalloped effect. And if you use contrasting woods, it just kind of emphasizes that. So that's how that all came about. I started with boxes this size, got a little bigger, and then realized that if I blew that up even larger, it would be an appropriate size for the Beads of Courage project.
So John, those are beautiful boxes. Who all was involved in this project?
Well, all the material's been donated by either private parties or Crosscut Hardwoods. And then we partnered with the Guild of Oregon Woodworkers, and they have done all the work of milling and preparing the kits for the wood turners to finish.
So I understand they supplied 30 kits. Can you show us what's in the kits?
Sure. First of all, they have provided the hexagonal box portion. It's been all milled and glued up and ready to go. The next item is the top, or the lid, excuse me. It will be referred to in the directions as the lid. It has a waste block already glued on with a center point established. Next, we have the block for the bottom, and it also has a waste block glued on, and you'll notice there's a reference line there that will be used during turning. The last piece of wood is what will be used and referred to as the top of the box, as opposed to the lid. And it has center point laid out, reference and a reference line off on it also. There will also be a set of directions that are all numbered and they were referred to in the video. A DVD so that each person can watch on their own. And the last item we have was provided by the Beads of Courage people, and it is a bead that they have requested be incorporated into the knob and be on the final product. Also, there is a card that is provided that each turner signs and puts in the box. This is in lieu of signing the box. They request that we don't put our signature on the bottom. So that's what's in the kit.
That's great. The instructions in the video should be a big help. How experienced do I need to be to do this kit?
Well, I would think if you consider yourself an intermediate wood turner, that you shouldn't have any trouble. That's certainly what I consider myself.
Okay, well that's good, but what if I do make a mistake?
Well, feel free to get in touch with me, and I'll see what I can do to come up with some spare parts or whatever I can do to help you out.
John's email is at the bottom of the screen there, and he'll be happy to help you out with any questions. So, on to the video.
Here to hold the part is to use the tailstock with I'm using a center, which is actually a cup center with a point on it, and shove it up against the jaws that I've opened up on the chuck and put good firm pressure on that. This could all, if you have a vacuum chuck, you may choose to put it up like this with a center and hold it with the vacuum chuck. So anyway, this is the way I do it. The technique I use for establishing the tenon, the size, I've got a little spacer here that I put up like this. And that gets you your diameter you want. That shows you your depth. And then I've got a 5-degree angle on that, on the end, that I can use to check the angle when I'm all done. So I'm going to just start, make a cut, and then we can just stop. Okay, you're going to cut all that apart. Anyway, so we've put the tenon on here. We're going to mount it in the chuck. And I always think it's important that you mark your part from the chuck. I use a knife and run along the side of the jaws and put 2 knife lines, and then a pencil mark, and I have a mark on the chuck, so I always use this spot on the chuck when I line up. It's really important to be able to go back right the exact same spot. So the next step is to put what I'm referring to as a center divot on the face. Needs to be deep enough you can get your dividers in. I'm going to lay out 2 diameters on the face here. One will be 5 inches. The other will be 6 7/8. The 5" doesn't have to be so accurate, but the 6 7/8 does, because that's what we're going to use to align the box when we glue. So what I'm going to do is dress off the outside diameter to the 6 7/8, and then I'm going to come in and scoop this out, and I want to make sure I figure out, I want to leave about an 1/8 inch to inset the bottom when we're all done, so it'll set flat. Then I want to leave about an 1/8 inch down there in the very bottom of the box. So we've dressed off the outside, we've scooped this out to the right depth, and we need to check and make sure that this surface right here, which we're going to glue our box to, is absolutely flat. So we need to take a straight edge, check that. I should mention this has also been finish sanded, because you don't want to get down in the bottom of that box and try to sand it when it's all together. So nice and flat, it's ready for gluing. Okay, we're ready to glue the box on the bottom, and since we still have a tenon on the bottom of the box, we will stick it up on a couple of strips of wood, and so it's nice and sturdy. Okay, the 6 7/8 inch diameter circle we made the bottom to leaves you about maybe a 1/16 from the edge with all the points, and it gives you a real convenient way of centering the box up just by checking from one side to the other. Once you've got it centered, run a pencil line around it. It'll just help you to get it on there when there's glue on it. Now, I like this little handy dandy glue bottle for putting glue on. Just recently discovered these. The only advice I would give if you're going to own one of these is that always remember to put the little cap back on. If you don't, you'll hate yourself. So anyway, here goes. Okay, after you have the glue on, I like to run around my finger and kind of spread the glue out and push it to the outside edge. I know there's glue to the inside, but hopefully it'll minimize the squeeze out there. So if you do this right, you've got some squeeze out on the outside and minimal squeeze out on the inside of the box, because it's really hard to clean up. Once you've got it on there, go around and check. And when you are, just put something on top, put a weight on it.
Okay.
So our next step is to finish the outside diameter and the inside surface of your lid. So we're going to, as we did on the bottom, we're going to put a tenon on, then we'll mount it, we will establish a center divot, use that to lay out a 5-inch diameter, and turn it down to 5 inches, your OD, and then scoop out, or however you want to do the inside of the lid. You can leave it flat if you'd like, but I like to put a slight scoop in there. It just looks much better. So here's the bottom. We've finished the outside diameter and scooped this out. I've scooped it out about 1/8 of an inch. And go ahead and finish sand and put the finish on so that when you're ready to fit this, it's all done. The next thing we need to do is prep the top for gluing. So the first step we need to take is to create a recess so that we can grab the top in the chuck by expanding the jaws. There's a number of different ways of doing this. I'm happen to be fortunate enough to have a large Forstner bit that I make the hole with. Then I'll center it on my vacuum chuck and put the angle, the negative angle on the edge that matches the jaws on my chuck. So if you don't have a vacuum chuck, you can approach it the same way we have for the other parts, by pushing it up against the, very securely, pushing it up against the jaws of your open chuck, and then use some type of scraper to come in and create a groove that's at least 1/4 inch deep, wide enough to accept your jaws, and then put the appropriate angle on the inside edge. It is important to remember that when you're done with this operation, regardless of how you do it, or that you need to end up with that center divot. This is what we use in the next step, the gluing operation. So we have created our recess, turned it over, put it back in the lathe, did a center divot, laid out our 5-inch diameter line, and then cleaned it up from that diameter out. We've also cleaned up the outside edge. The diameter is not critical. It just needs, I think, to be cleaned up. When you're done here, this surface, which will be the glue surface, needs to be checked and make sure that it's very flat. Now we're ready to glue it on the box. The next thing we need to do is glue the top on the box. So this is how we're going to approach this. We're going to bead a glue around that edge that we've flattened. Spread the glue out. As you see, we have our the glued up portion in the lathe, and we're actually going to use the lathe to align everything when we glue the top on. This is my faithful helper, Luann. So she's going to be my cranker today. So here we go. Gonna put the top in place. Okay, go ahead. Apply pretty good pressure. Very good. So after the glue is dried, it's time to trim all this extra material on the top and bottom off. It becomes obvious why we used a recess on the bottom so that we can set nice and flat on the bandsaw. Use a square and check to make sure that you're cutting square to the table. Best not to come over and hit the side of the box. And I like to cut as close as I can. I'm using a 3/8 inch 4 teeth per inch blade. So here we go. Now that we have the overhang trimmed off of the box, it's time to do the sanding on the sides. And this operation completely depends on what equipment you happen to have available. The best option would be a table-mounted vertical belt sander. So if you've got one of those or have a friend that has one, you're in good shape. I'm going to show you, since I don't have a sander like that, I'll show you how I've been doing it, and I'm sure there's a dozen different ways that people can approach this step. So I built this simple holding jig. If you've got a nice woodworker's vise, that would work great. So anyway, I'm set up so that I can clamp it down, keep it from getting away from me. I just have a hand belt sander here. I'm going to lay it flat on the side to get a good reference. I'm going to actually tilt it a little bit to work on this edge till I feel it become net with the edge of the walnut. So that's kind of the approach here. When I've gone around one end, I'll flip it around in the jig and do the other side, and then we'll be ready to do the finish sanding on it. For the finishing sanding, I do use a orbital sander, and I start with 100 grit. Go to 220 and then to 320. With the sides all finish sanded, we're finally ready to do some real turning. So we're going to grab uh, the box by the recessed end. And if you remember, this is actually the top. And then we're going to turn the corner radius here on the bottom. So I've also marked, when I put it in the lathe before, I marked how it should line up with the chuck. Very important that you use the tailstock to make this stable. Good pressure. I'll be using a 5/8 bowl gouge for this, and I will be using a pull cut. To get the right radius on there, it's more like developing that curve so that you end up with 3/16 or 1/4 of an inch away from the walnut, your points, and then your arc will be about in the middle, about a 1/2 inch. It's not critical. Just get a shape on there that looks nice to you, and when you do the top, you'll match to it. One thing I need to mention is this line that was provided with your blank has a 5-inch diameter mark on it, and that's a reference mark. So you want this radius you put on here to go from 3/16 back to 5 inches, and develop the arc here on this scallop that you find appealing. So we're going to start off about 1500 RPM. Okay, when I get to this point, I like to start using more of a shear cut. There's an excellent article in the 2017 issue of American Woodturner by Mike Mahoney that explains this cut quite well. So, well worth looking up and reading. I like to finish this cut with a negative rate scraper and do a shearing cut with it. Okay, that's what I want. I like the shape of the scallop, and so I'm ready to sand, and we'll do a finish sand on it. Okay, the next step is basically to put that same arc on the top of the box. So we're going to flip it around, grab it in by the tenon, use the tailstock for support again, Now I'm very carefully using the marks I put on there when I first grabbed it. Now as you develop this arc over here, you're going to check and make sure that you're getting, this came out to be about a little over 7/16 at the highest part of the scallop here, and we're between 3/16 and 1/4 on all these points. So here we go. I want to re-emphasize that I'm using a pull stroke because I think it's much easier to come off of that when you start cutting air there, if you're coming off a solid cut rather than a push cut. Shifting more to a shearing cut now. Okay, that looks pretty good. Not going to bother to sand at this point because we're going to wait till we fit the lid and then blend the upper part of this arc with the lid. The next task we have is to create the hole here for the in the top of the box, and like any of these operations, there's a number of different ways that can be done. I choose to pierce the hole, and you can actually use a bowl gouge and open it up that way if you care to. But I'm going to pierce a hole here that's 4.5. Here's your 5-inch diameter reference line. I want to stay in, provide plenty of room for the lip on the lid. So I'll just pick something around 4.5 inches, and I'm going to pierce. When I do this, I'm going to go twice as wide as the parting tool here, so that when the center section is breaks off, or when I go through, there won't be any interference and excitement. One thing I'd like to mention is that I've put a felt tip mark on the side of my tools, basically the thickness of the wood here. So this is a deep piercing cut, and I want to know when I'm getting close. If you listen carefully, you can tell when you're about ready to go through. You can retract your tool and break it off rather than cut all the way through if you choose to do that. It's now time to make the hole for the lid and create the seat for the lid to sit on. And as with any lid, you need to sneak up on that dimension very carefully. I'm going to shoot for a lid seat about 3/16 or 1/4 inch deep. That leaves a nice thickness of lid. And I prefer to have lids on these boxes a little bit looser than we wood turners tend to make lids. This doesn't need to be real tight. In fact, a little slop, so that in case some warpage takes place, it won't start binding. So let's make the lid. That I like. That's just about right. We're now ready to finish shaping the inside of the lid hole, and I'm going to basically taper it back. I'm going to leave quarter inch here, and then taper down till we almost hit the flats. I find that a box scraper works really well for this. A parting tool would also work, or a carbide scraper or whatever. So anyway, here we go. That's pretty close. A little sandpaper, and we'll be all done with this. So I might say something about box scraper. Actually, it's a tool that's sharpened on two edges. It's a scraper on this side and also on the edge. This is, you can see, it's been sharpened here also. But it's really nice for dressing off this part in boxes where you have straight walls. You can work right down the wall and then across the bottom. So it's a very handy tool. So to finish shaping the top of the lid, we're going to put the lid in the hole. We're going to bring the tailstock up, hold it in place, put some pressure on it, and get busy and reduce the size of the tenon and start blending the lid to this arc here. So. So what we're trying to do here is just continue this arc on up and make a nice, it'll actually change. This will be a little sharper arc here and then flatten into a nice dome across the top. One of the challenges I've found is not to create a flat here, but continue up into the lid and blend this together. So. So I think that's the shape I'm looking for. We've got a nice blended arc there, and it's ready for sanding. One of the tools that I found extremely handy is negative rake scrapers. You might have noticed that they can be used in two different positions. You can lay them flat on the tool rest. They work quite well, and then you can rotate them up on edge and do shear scraping with them. Okay, I'm now ready to sand this, and we'll go to finish sand all the way up to about there on the lid. And I'll be using this angle drill. In order to finish the top of the lid, I'm going to wedge the lid in place using some paper towel. There's certainly other ways of doing this. Using blue painter's tape to put some pieces across there, hold it in place, would also work. You might find that if you're wedging it with towel, you might have to use two thicknesses, or if you can't use towel, maybe newspaper or whatever. So I'm sure you'll figure it out. I should point out that when you're turning this, you want to use your tool in a manner that pushes the lid in, rather than a type of cut that might, if you got a catch or something, would pop it out. So. So again, I'm going to start off with 120, end up at 400. While we still have the lid wedged in place, we're going to drill the hole to accept the tenon on the knob. So before you put this in, it's a good idea to check to see what kind of thickness you have that you're working with, and so that you don't drill this hole all the way through. I am drilling a 3/8 hole and 3/8 deep, so. So there's a lot of different ways of getting this lid off. I'm going to try soft mallet around the edge. And you can put a screw in here and try and pull it out. Last resort, you can drill a little hole through there and blow it off with air. So let's see what happens here. Let's see if I can tap it out of there. There it is. Very good. The last major turning portion of this project is to finish the bottom. And how you do this depends a lot on what kind of equipment you've got. The challenge is how do you hold on to it? If you've got a Longsworth chuck or coal jaws, they should work quite nicely in the expansion mode for holding it. If you decide to use a jam chuck, I would like to emphasize that you want to keep the tailstock engaged through the whole turning process, and then just break off the nub and hand sand at the end, because there's so much weight in the bottom of this box that it's going to could easily fly off a jam chuck. I happen to have a chuck for my vacuum pump that I've built that I'm going to use. I'm going to leave my tailstock engaged as long as I can, in case I have a catch or something. To prevent the box from flying off the lathe. Okay, I'm ready to sand. So this whole operation is about hollowing out the base here so that it sits flat. And if you remember correctly, I figured I could go about an 1/8 inch deep here and still have an 1/8 inch in the lowest part of the bottom. So I started off with 3/8 bowl gouge to get my shape, and then use my negative rake scrapers. This one is able to get into a small radius, and this on the flatter surfaces. So now I'm ready to finish sand, blend it to here into the arch that we created, and be done, ready for finish.
Well, John, that was well done. Now, what about the finish?
Well, the finish is something we need to pay really close attention to. It's vitally important that whatever you use is safe for the children. So please refer to the instruction sheets that have information on that.
Great. And the last step is the knob. And the knob, we don't supply wood for the knob. You can use any contrasting wood that you find appropriate. The only requirement is that you incorporate the bead, which is the Beads of Courage bead, into the top. Some examples of different knobs are shown below here. So folks, that's it. And we hope you enjoyed and found the video very informative. And the kits will be available from Northwest Woodturners. And we hope you participate in the project. And thanks, John, for all your work.
Well, thank you, Roger.